You're in a new role, but you're still a numbers guy. Talk about what's similar and what's different in how government should look at numbers versus how you looked at numbers when you were CEO of Microsoft.
Yeah. Let me start first with a principle. I don't know how you run anything, understand anything, or do anything without numbers to ground you. People have different beliefs, different principles, different values, but at the end of the day, most things you want to do wind up being investing in so much money to have somebody do something and have something positive happen. In a business, that looks one way. It looks a lot about profits, market share. In government, it looks like outcomes for people with some constraint, particularly at the state level, that taxes and expenditures kind of match up. That's kind of an important thing. But the need to use numbers to diagnose things is very interesting. I was looking at criminal justice numbers. You can have a variety of views about how much we should imprison drug offenders, what the theory is of how to handle violent felons. But at the end of the day, without numbers to really take a look at these things, it's unfair for partisans on both sides to have a discussion. You don't really know how far apart you are without numbers to support the analysis and the discussion. I think the same thing is true in business. Numbers matter, and numbers at the end of the day are the way we can really measure our performance. Since I left Microsoft, I've gotten into the basketball business. One thing I can tell you about the sports business, maybe even more than the political business, I'm not sure. The sports business is all about numerical accountability. We won the game 103-97, or we lost the game. Every statistic, every number, every contract, and the sort of pay for the player. It's very numerical business, and it's a very accountable business. And I wish the same thing out of government.
Well, we're gonna get, at the very end, I wanted to ask you about the basketball business, but before we get there, sticking to government for a while, we're having a debate right now in the country over healthcare. Without getting into necessarily what side you're on, are we looking at the numbers? Are we looking at the right facts? How would you approach looking at healthcare from a numbers perspective?
Okay, let's start with a basic fact. If you go to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services databases, they don't agree with one another. That's not a good thing. The last time the information was updated was 2015. Whoops, that wasn't too far into the Affordable Care Act, and we're sitting here trying to make judgments about what to do. The numbers need to be a better guide. If you dive into what's there, then you have to say, what are the components of Medicaid? Most of the press is all about kind of Medicaid and the ACA, but talk through the specifics. What's going into nursing home care? What's going into the care of children? What's going into the care of single people of young age? And yet most of that discussion at the more detailed level is just absent, at least in the general discussion in the press that gets reported.
Have you looked at the numbers, and has it led you to any conclusions about what's working and what's not in healthcare?
What's working and what's not is sort of a matter of individual opinion. I won't make judgment on what's good and bad, because everybody's got their own principles and beliefs. I can tell you what surprised me when I looked at the numbers. And every governor may well know this, but I'm just a citizen for this purpose. I did not realize how much care for the indigent elderly was an important part of Medicaid. I just didn't know that. It's a big part of the Medicaid budget. You have to think about that differently than the part that goes into care for children living with their parents. Frankly, which stunned me by how small it is. And we don't even talk about CHIP in that condition. And CHIP and Medicaid for children, I don't know. I still can't know that I understand the difference between the two, but you sort of have to have a view. Really looking at the details of the numbers, I think, are important, and certainly I saw surprises, and I would expect a better discussion. There will be more old people as we go forward. The notion that, we don't have to think about that when we talk about where we're going with our health care budget, I think, is fascinating.
And taking a step back from healthcare, but staying in the current politics realm, you started USA Facts last year.
No, I started it 3 years ago. I want it clear, I didn't start it at a time of presidential election.
Okay, so it started, even more importantly, it started a few years ago. The idea was to inject more facts, more data into the political debate. It would seem like there's less facts in a lot of the political discourse today. Are we doing ourselves a disservice as a society when there's so much more time spent on personalities and that sort of thing versus looking at the numbers, looking at policy?
I think we are. I mean, let me give you just a simple example. You open up the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal yesterday. In both the Journal and the Times, all you could see on the front page before the jump into the paper was who was for and who was against various things. The Washington Post at least actually talks substantively about the new proposal. That would be like in a corporate acquisition environment, people talking about who's the CEO you like best, this company or this company, instead of talking about this company actually offered this amount of money to buy this company and promises this synergies. In business, it would, in a sense, be more about the numerics and the substance, and less about the people dynamics, et cetera. And I think that's a sad thing in terms of the state of affairs.
Now, we are at the National Governors Association. I want to put a few minds at ease. You've talked about this elsewhere, but you're not looking to take any of their jobs. Is that right?
Nope. I will never run for political office. I have no interest, no ambition. We are beholden to the service the people put in. But for me, it would be a very tough job. I don't think I have the patience. And look, it's a hard sales job. Not only to get elected,
you
but then
like
to manage
hard sales jobs. Or you certainly did one for a lot of years.
Yeah, but I think you got to sell yourself a little bit as the product when you're running for office, and I value that. People want to know what your beliefs, your principles, your values are. I think I'd have a harder time with that than telling you why, in fact, Microsoft Azure is actually better than Amazon Web Services. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a paid political announcement on behalf of a former CEO.
In general, you try to stay out of taking sides in most political debates, but you've talked about a couple exceptions to that, a couple areas where both you and your philanthropic efforts have said this is a core value. Talk about what are the areas where you've said, no, we are politically pro this.
Well, number one, I'll say we're a partisan for the data, and that actually is something important. The notion that you should be partisan for numbers and their accuracy has become a partisan issue. We are partisan for that, my wife and I. Second thing, as a former business person, I have a hard time not being partisan for balanced budgets. Speaking at a Governors Association meeting is a little bit easier because that's kind of the way states work. It's a little harder at the federal level. I'm silent on how we get there, raise taxes, cut expenses in some ways. But I think the democratic process needs to resolve that, but we need a balanced budget. The third thing I'm very partisan on, and that's the focus of our philanthropic effort. We do think every kid in America deserves an opportunity, a shot at the American dream, and that will require a certain kind of support for school systems, for mental health, for drug abuse, for the kinds of things that throw kids off the track or make it impossible for them ever to get on the track. Pre-K education, there's a variety of things. That doesn't mean we are focused broadly on poverty in the country. We are focused broadly on opportunity for kids.
And talk about how that's shifted. I mean, your experience growing up, you felt like that American dream was accessible to you, and I think you feel like it's less accessible to a lot of the population today. And talk about why that is and what needs to change.
Well, let me do it by the numbers. If you're born in the bottom quintile in this country, there's a 27% probability that if you're born, there's a 27% probability that you will remain in the bottom quintile. Now, some might say that's not good. That's if you're white, 27%. Perfect is 20% actually, right? 20% everywhere would be perfect. If you are African American in this country and you're born in the bottom quintile, the probability is 50% that you will stay in the bottom quintile. That can't be viewed as okay. We are trying to get more data. How does that look for people born in rural communities? How does that look for people born in various parts of cities, not just inner cities, but parts of the suburb? The opioid crisis that people want to talk about is certainly more broad than not. I don't think we're going to find good outcomes for kids in areas where opioid use has exploded. So this notion of focusing in on that population and making sure every kid gets something close to a shot at the American dream. My dad was an immigrant. He came to this country for a shot at the American dream. I'm lucky he got that shot, and I think every kid in the country deserves that shot.
One of the areas that data is going to be even more important than it is today is in artificial intelligence, and machine learning is based on data. One of the issues that's come up, I wrote about it on Friday, is this idea that people think of data as unbiased, but machine learning is actually bringing in that bias. How important is it that we look for bias in our data before we start turning decision making over to machines?
I don't know. Machine learning, AI, that's about kind of forecasting, statistical approximation. Right now, I'd be really happy if everybody had the actual data of what really happened. What really happened last year? How much did we really spend on X? How many kids actually have shown proficiency in reading at the 3rd grade level? What communities are they from? Are there communities where kids' reading scores are not as good? What resources, Title I dollars and other things are being applied? You don't need any machine learning there, you just need good systems to report. Now, using artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques then to build models of what might be a better outcome, also a good thing, but getting the actuals correct, I think, is right now my aspirational starting point, at least in terms of our work.
And in terms of your work, I mean, one of the goals is to get the information. The other is to get people to consume it.
Right.
And I think you're having a little bit of a challenge on that second part. You started out, announced it, got some pretty good attention. I think you said earlier that only about 4,000 people a day are actually checking out the website. Why do you think that is? Is it a lack of interest, or is it more work that needs to be done on your part?
A combination of both. There's certainly more work we need to do. Site needs to be friendlier. We got to build up our social media followership because we can't count on people just coming to the site. By the way, you can like us on Facebook at USA Facts. You can follow us on Twitter. Paid political announcement for that. But we also need to really find the things that are going to stimulate interest. We're working, hopefully we'll get it out next week, I don't know, but we're working on something that tries to take the president's proposed budget through OMB, through CBO, and oh, by the way, through the history, and look at it through a number of contexts. What does it look like in terms of revenue and expenses, but also what does it look like in more specific terms? What kind of GDP growth do you need to get? What kind of infrastructure investment? What are the assumptions on interest rates? And show kind of a holistic picture. And then people can form judgments as to whether they think CBO, very professional organization, is right, the president's budget is right, or frankly, as an old business person, the best forecast for me used to be to just look at a trend line, let Excel draw it, and assume that's what would happen next. It worked pretty well in business. I don't know that it works in government. Economists tell me it doesn't, but it was always better than asking salespeople for their forecasts, believe you me. And I think a few politicians have a few of the same characteristics as some of those salespeople.
All right, well, I have a few more questions, but I want to see first if other people out there have questions. So I don't know if we do have a microphone, yeah. So if you have a question for Steve, let me know. If not, I'll keep going for a minute or two. Oh, here's one.
Hi, John McDade, Rhode Island Future. A lot of cognitive science over the last several years has indicated that people, even though they're presented with facts, still have a difficult time overcoming inherent biases. How would you respond to those kinds of issues? And do you believe that in this sort of post-fact world that facts really will still make a difference?
Well, we just finished a poll because you can worry about that. You launch something called USA Facts, and the next thing you know, people say they're not interested in the facts. Now, we got a lot of buzz when we announced, and we were all fired up on the facts, and then our visit count went down. So we did this poll, partly to inform ourselves about our own site, and partly also to understand, are the facts interesting? The data that comes back from citizens, and it was D's and R's and rural and urban and high school graduates and not. People say 88% of the time, 88% of people say they want facts, not anecdotes. That they think the data they're getting now is biased. That they think people, as they argue, sort of in a highly charged way, they don't even argue from the same fact set. That they believe politicians who use real data, government data, as opposed to people who don't. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean the cognitive science is wrong, but I think what it does mean is people sort of want the facts. They kind of believe they're open-minded to the facts. And even if people aren't as open-minded as they'll tell us in the poll, people believe that that's a sign of progress and moving forward. I would much prefer to have people arguing whether we need to spend, what number should I pick? We should be spending $200 billion a year on CapEx for transportation infrastructure, or $250, rather than just have everything's broken, everything needs to change. And what you really wind up with is some people would argue 200, some would argue 225, some would argue 250, and you could say, what's 25 billion between friends? But in the scale of the 5.7 trillion of taxes that are raised every year, I'm not saying 25 billion is not important, but it's 1,000 billions to get to a trillion. People lose that
So
because they can't relate to those. So I say, yeah, very funny. I've known Ina long enough that she can get away with that.
And in terms of that, I mean, still, I think there is this question of, are facts important enough to people? And the poll, said they're interested, but the numbers to your site, the facts, if you will, say maybe they're not so interested. So how do we get to where people's actions match their aspirations?
Every politician needs the facts, wants the facts, and uses the facts. You know how I know that? Eventually, you have to vote on a bill that says spend X or spend Y. Now, people may not, at least politicians may not, or may not be, but it gets down to making a set of numeric decisions. Whether every citizen's going to get interested in that, I don't know. Politicians, you could say, may or may not get interested in that, but at the end of the day, you're still actually not voting on a kind of principle or religion. You actually have to vote on how much money to put into transportation infrastructure and how to trade transportation infrastructure off against aid to children, off against resources for the elderly. Those are real, concrete, numeric decisions that politicians make, and they're not really making decisions at the end of the day just on their values. They have to reduce them down to a set of numbers.
Okay, other questions? Got one here.
Patrick Anderson, Providence Journal. Steve, do you accept the perception that the tech sector has not had a very strong historical influence on politics despite its efforts? And if so, why is that?
Well, let me start with the basic premise that I think industry, that business, is only supposed to have an effect on government, or politics, I think you said, to the degree that it's in the interest of their shareholders, employees, et cetera. If absolutely you think overwhelmingly our shareholders would benefit by X, then a business should advocate for it. For example, I think it's probably fair to say, Mary was up here talking about rural broadband. I think probably you could say that is in the interest of Microsoft shareholders. It is a reasonable thing for a company to take a point of view on. If you say, should a company take a point of view on how much to spend on Medicaid? Well, certainly not a tech company, at least that's my opinion. That is a personal issue, it's a political issue. Individual employees and shareholders should make their own decisions. I think the tech industry has been involved in political issues that actually are important to the tech industry. Some companies have decided that for their shareholders, for their employees and other important constituency, they have spoken out on some social issues. I'm more divided on whether that actually makes sense or not, because for every employee, or at least for a number of employees that you may have that are on one side of a social issue, you're also going to have employees on the other side. But businesses, including Microsoft, when I ran it, have taken points of view on some social issues of importance to employees. But I think there's a lot of things people expect businesses to weigh in on, or industries to weigh in on, where if I was the CEO, I would think it's wholly inappropriate to express an opinion. My own opinion doesn't matter. It's only the opinions of the employees, the shareholders, the customers, et cetera.
So do you think tech companies are speaking out too much? Obviously, a lot of speaking out against, Trump, whether it's Trump's travel ban or immigration policies or LGBT issues. Are tech companies speaking out too much?
Take the immigration ban. That relates to flow of labor a lot into the country. That's again, this is just my judgment, completely my own personal opinion. That's a perfectly reasonable thing for tech companies to talk about. LGBT issues are of great importance to, at least at Microsoft when I was there, it's of great importance to the employee base. The shareholder base is probably much more over the map. So you have to make a decision about the importance to your employees versus the divided opinions that certainly exist amongst your shareholders, because we know there are issues on which people in the country disagree in that area.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then I have a final one. Is there any more questions? All right, well, you mentioned basketball. I'd be remiss. You've obviously, we do have one more. I'll get my basketball question in a sec.
Hi, Marianne O'Hare, producer, Conversations on Healthcare on ReachMD, iHeartRadio, and a number of other platforms. You're talking very much about policy, facts, data. Healthcare is now increasingly aggregating data from all kinds of sources. People like that other company, Apple, Microsoft, has had its own attempts at getting into the healthcare space and collecting data that can meaningfully be applied to improving population health. And we're having trouble doing that. Do you see a solution moving forward? I mean, Apple's got ResearchKit, HealthKit. We've got IBM's Watson happening in the AI sector. Where do you see the opportunity there for all this data that you want to collect to actually meaningfully move forward outcomes?
Yeah, some people don't know you guys did Health Vault.
Health Vault, right, yeah.
I don't want to collect any data about people. That's not what USA Facts is about. USA Facts is about collecting information in aggregate about populations that government collects and publishes. That's all. And there are no privacy issues or anything else because we're using publicly available data. Now, to address more your question, but I want to make sure absolutely that I think it's completely orthogonal to USA Facts.
Sure.
I do believe in all economic growth, health, innovation is an important part of the picture. It's interesting that mostly when we talk about healthcare, we talk about Medicaid, Medicare, insurance, who gets it, who's not. In a way, the most important things for us to talk about is how long are people living? What is the quality of their life? What is obese? We can get a lot of the stuff out of the CDC. What are obesity rates? What are depression rates? What are binge drinking rates? In a way, assessing longevity and quality of life, maybe that is the ultimate outcome. Healthcare is supposed to be a tool to get there. The healthcare industry itself has shown innovation in a number of things that might help with the ultimate outcome. You know, your watch is supposed to tell you how much you walk to keep you more fit. Good, you've got one on. But at the end of the day, when you look at the healthcare industry, who would really be the beneficiary of the kind of innovations you were talking about, the healthcare industry today is not really structured in a way that capitalism helps improve it. In most industry, competition through capitalism drives improvements in price and quality. In this case, I think the healthcare industry is almost always driven on quality as opposed to on price and quality. And at the end of the day, if we're going to do anything, this is again my opinion, but the data proves out that the cost of healthcare per procedure, per everything, is going up, and yet longevity is not going up commensurately. People like to talk about life expectancy. We list it because the government publishes it, but let's face it, life expectancy is a forecast. What we have in our USA Facts database is the average age of death. What was the average age at which people died last year? And how many people died young, et cetera? Particularly as a 61-year-old, I'm much more interested right now in my average age of death than my average age of expected life. So when you talk about the technologies that you were addressing, the question is, do they come to me personally to help improve my health? Do they come to the healthcare sector, and is there enough competitive pressure of the right kind, not the wrong kind, in the healthcare industry to drive improved quality and reduce prices?
All right, real quickly, another area you've invested a lot, put a lot of money in is the Clippers. You measure everything by results and numbers and success. How would you rate that investment so far, and when do you think it'll start to pay off for you?
Well, the investment has paid off. How has it paid off? I'm happy as I could possibly be, and I know that the price of the franchise is at least worth what I paid for it, or maybe more. That's good. But how do I feel right now specifically? 51. That's the number of games we won last year. I feel 51. How do I want to feel next year? I'd like to feel 56 or 57. We lost a good guy, so I might, there's some downside risk. Ooh, 46, ooh, that would be bad. And ultimately, what I really want is to feel 16. 16. 16 wins in the playoffs. 16. And if you feel 16, that investment more than paid off.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ballmer, thank you.